But let's get into some NFL. We talked a lot about this yesterday, but, John, you wrote about it at 973ESPN.com, the legislation of football, taking the football out of football, and I guess taking a night to kind of reflect back and write about this. You know, you really look at the rules and what they've done and what they're trying to do. You know, it really seems that they are doing their best to try to take football away from the fans.
Well, I'm still reeling from a Flyers guy insulting Mr. Snyder. I'm stunned by that.
I just think he needed the foresight to get wider seats. He thought, because not all those red seats are the same width, John. That's all I'm putting out there.
As long as there's an ass 18 inches apart in them, that's all anybody cares about as an owner. But, yeah, I mean, from pro football's perspective, obviously we talked about it a bit on the show yesterday, and I've been talking about it for years. It goes long before this targeting rule, which we all knew was coming at a certain point. I just think the rollout is a disaster, and I think at some point, you know, there's this adversarial relationship between the owners and players, and it's been that way for quite a while. And I think they have to realize at a certain point they are partners in this, and they need to get together and figure something out because, you know, if you want to go back to the 70s or 80s or even early 90s, already this is a completely different game. And you know, to a newer generation that doesn't know that and grew up with this brand of football, perhaps that's not as big a deal. But if it continues to go in a direction where you take out some of the excitement and some of the things that have made the sport popular, eventually it's not going to be popular. I think that's common sense. And it has, and people automatically shrug that off and say, look at the television ratings, look at the interest. And I agree with all of that today. It has happened in other sports. I mentioned boxing yesterday. You could even argue Major League Baseball, which was once the national pastime in this country and far more popular than professional football. It no longer is. Things change. And if this league continues going down the path it's going, it's not going to be the most popular sport in America continuing, you know, no matter what. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Hey, John, is this akin to the new college football targeting rule? Heard you guys talking about this a little bit yesterday.
We don't really know because they haven't explained it yet. And that, I think, is the backward nature of this entire process. Ultimately, I can tell you what I think. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal because I don't think they're going to tell the officials to be completely enslaved to what it says on paper and say, you know, any helmet-to-helmet hit is going to be a 15-yard penalty. I don't think you can play this game if you go in that direction. So I don't think that's the way it's going to be. But they literally announced a rule without telling the players and everyone else and the public what the rule actually is. And then they're going to sort of go backwards and sort of declare the rule, decree the rule, and then figure out what the rule actually means. And that just makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big problems we talked about with the catch rule and a lot of the bizarre things that we saw last year from the officials, and you talked a lot about this, was everybody's ripping the officials. You say, well, the officials aren't bored. They're just doing what they're told. And this rule here, you're going to have the officials being told to do something, and they're not even sure what they're supposed to be looking for.
Yeah, not yet. They haven't explained it to them.
But even if you explained it as a guy coming in, initiating contact with his head down, I mean, that's essentially every single.
How are you going to do a quarterback sneak, for example? If you're on the 3-yard line and if you're on the 3-yard line trying to score, how's a running back not going to? How are you going to tell a football player not to put his head down?
Yeah, well, exactly. I don't think you can do that. And ultimately, and we can only guess at this point, I don't think they are going to do that. But we'll have to see. You mentioned, Pete, the targeting rule in college. Ultimately, I think it's going to be similar to that, and it's going to be players launching at other players. And if that's the case, it's a penalty. You look at it on video and decide if the player should be ejected. I think that's what it's going to end up being, but I can't tell you that for a fact. Nobody can tell you that for a fact because they haven't explained it. And my whole issue with this entire thing is, well, I don't like the rule. At least do it the correct way and figure it out. And when you have all your ducks in a row, then announce it. You didn't have to roll it out the way they rolled it out. And you have players saying, I don't know how we're supposed to play this game. And they announce they're going to go across the country and every team and explain how they're going to call this rule. You do that first, and then you announce the rule. But to me, the larger issue is again, I think people forget this, and I think they really have to look in the mirror if they expect the NFL or any sports league to be some kind of moral compass. At the end of the day, it's an entertainment industry designed to entertain you. And if you're,
I think fans have a hard time with that, though.
Yeah, if you're looking.
I mean, when you say an entertainment industry, you almost think of WWE. They call themselves sports entertainment. The NFL, Major League Baseball, they're not saying, "Hey, we are sports entertainment," because you're almost. The WWE is a scripted form of entertainment that blends sport into it, sport and athleticism. These sports leagues are not supposed to be thought of in an entertainment manner so much, but I understand what you're saying.
I think, I think you're automatically putting that correlation. I think there's different kinds of entertainment. There's scripted entertainment, and there's reality-based entertainment, even in traditional, what people think is vehicles, whether it's reality television or scripted television. In this case, the difference between WWE and the NFL or Major League Baseball is one is scripted, one is not. But the reality is they're fighting for the same viewers. And that's where it's the same. And that's what it is. And everything designed to make money and to garner television ratings, and that's what the NFL is an entertainment vehicle at its core. It's a sport, but it's entertainment, and it's designed for people to enjoy if they want to watch it on television, if they want to go see it with their family. It's supposed to be an enjoyable, entertaining experience.
Right.
I think people who are looking to the NFL and holding them to a higher standard, and this is rare because I criticize the league, I don't think it's fair. I don't think Roger Goodell should be held up to a higher standard than people are holding up their, politicians that run their town, or even clergy, or even people that are supposed to point you in the right direction when it comes to morality. If you're looking for that from the National Football League, there's something wrong. This is a violent game. It's time to stipulate that, and that's what I wrote on 973ESPN.com. Nobody's forcing anyone to play this game. If you decide to play it, there is a very good chance you could suffer some serious health consequences.
And the problem is, you might say, let these guys sign something that says we know what we're getting into, but they do have lawsuits against them. So if you're going to sue me, I got to do things to combat that, right? And that's where my question comes from. How much say do the players have with these rule changes? Like, is there a committee that says this is what we would like to see implemented, or this is what we would like to see taken out of? We're not as concerned with, some of the things that you guys are pushing on us. Do they have a committee that has say to the rules committee?
No, there's a competition committee, and the players aren't involved, and that's what I talked about sort of as this partnership, and I think they have to get to the point where they do get the players involved with this type of thing. I think it would surprise most people that the vast majority of players hate this type of thing as well. Now, the issue becomes, and I mentioned this yesterday, is 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds think differently than 55-year-olds. And you kind of think you're indestructible when you're in your early 20s, and you say, yeah, I would like to trade. The risk-reward is great enough where I'm going to make this significant amount of money for a short period of time. I'll take that chance. You know, if you then start having issues in your 50s, you kind of almost want to backtrack and say, well, I made a mistake. And maybe you did. Maybe ultimately you end up there. But I think that's where the partnership has to come in and say, look, in the past, you can make a strong argument that the NFL tried to hide potential long-term issues with concussions. That's fine. That's water under the bridge. They've litigated that. The players won. They're going to get significant money from that. But from this point forward, when it's no longer going on and everybody knows the issues and the potential issues, there is where you have to come to this 50-50 split and say you're partners. And if you want this sport to continue the way it is, you have to sign that waiver. You have to guarantee in the future you're not going to try to garner back, you know, significant hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars through litigation. And that's what all these safety-based initiatives are about. They're about public relations, and they're about stopping future litigation.
Well, public relations, John, isn't too far from optics, though, and that's the biggest problem I have with the way this rule has been unveiled, is that the optics of it, you've got a league that what's a catch, what's not a catch. They realized they had a problem. You've said before, and you were one of the first people that said they were kind of operating quietly under different rules and legislation for the Super Bowl in order to take that off the table. And then they come right back with this lowering the helmet rule. Haven't they learned from their previous mistakes, or don't they care?
You know, I ask myself that question all the time because it is strange the way they shoot themselves in the foot at times. Because, look, I always knew a targeting rule was coming. So to me, the issue from the optics standpoint, as you say, Pete, is the way they rolled it out, which was just a disaster. And you would think they would have understood that from previous instances. But I also think that's not the real issue, ultimately, because they will do it backwards, but it will get done. It just looks silly at the beginning. But that's a short-term problem. The long-term problem is, are they going to turn this game into one where it gets to the point we've talked about a lot on this show, about how difficult it is to watch certain games during the regular season already, before this added level of new legislation about the number of flags, about the stoppages, about the poor play. You know, at some point, you would think there is going to be a tipping point to the fact where people might wake up one Sunday and say, you know what? I'm really not enjoying this anymore. I might go do something else rather than go to the game or even watch it on TV or spend my money on the merchandise because they don't enjoy it. I think that's the longer-term problem and obviously the more serious problem.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. I mean, realistically, what do you think that they could – how could they implement this rule to make it work?
Well, I think the best case scenario is sort of the college rule, the college targeting rule, which they've struggled with at times, but they've gotten better as the years have gone on. And ultimately, I think you start penalizing people who are launching themselves with their helmet. And then sort of you look at the video and decide whether it should be just the 15-yard penalty variety or the player should be thrown out of the game. And in college, if it becomes in the first half, you're also suspended for the first half of the next game. maybe you go in a direction like that. If you're going in that direction, and they clearly are, they're going to have a targeting rule. So it depends how far you go with it. Again, it's not tangible, as Pete mentioned with quarterback sneak. It's not tangible to flag an offensive lineman who's pulling on a screen or trying to get a defensive back on the open field. Same thing with the defensive lineman. Are we going to have a yellow flag every single play? People have already talked about how many people are going to throw out in a game. Then you have to start talking about the inactives on game day. Are you going to keep it at 46 if people are going to start getting thrown out? And that's how I started the piece on 973ESPN.com. There's the law of unintended consequences. If you keep a perfect example of that is if you keep the game day roster at 46 and start throwing players out, well, then all of a sudden,
and you could throw them out from headquarters remotely.
Yeah, all of a sudden you have guys who are maybe injured that have to go back in the game, and that's a safety issue. It's a Pandora's box, and they never seem to think proactively. It's only reactively. And, they'll come to a day, they'll say, guys are putting players on the field who are, maybe their hamstrings tweaked, maybe their ankle is spraining, maybe they hyperextended their knee. But guess what? We got nobody else dressed. They got to limp on the field and go through it. Well, that's a safety issue. But there is no sort of next level thinking in this league, and there hasn't been for a long time.
Crazy. John McMullen, more at JF McMullen on Twitter. Of course, you read his piece on the legislation of pro football and how the NFL is changing right before our very eyes. More on that at 973ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.